the use of technology in peer review, and ethical considerations. This is an interactive session, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. So please do submit your questions throughout the session so we can address them towards the end of this hour. Your questions can be posted in the questions section of your control panel within GoToWebinar, which is a separate window on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you can navigate to the questions section now and want to try it out, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to share any questions you have on this topic, or perhaps what you'd like to gain from attending today's event. I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording, along with a certificate of attendance in 24 hours. The slides for today's session can be downloaded from within the control panel. Again, within GoToWebinar, there's a handout section. Navigate to there, download the slides, and keep them if you'd like to follow along live or refer to them after. So before we get started today, we do have some questions for you. We're going to ask 2 quick questions to our audience. I'm going to pop the first one up now. So this is a poll question showing on your screen right now, and we'd love to know which of these best describes you. This will let us know how our audience is made up today, and you can also get a feel for who else is joining us live right now. So please select an answer that best describes you. If you feel like none of these answers best describe you, feel free to pop an answer in the questions box. We'll have a look at that as well. And we'll just give it a few more seconds to get some more responses in. Okay, I'll just give it 5 more seconds. Okay, brilliant. Now I'm going to share those responses, and we can see that over half of our attendees today are master's or PhD candidates. This is really useful information for us and for our presenters to know who's here to help tailor our guidance to you. So thank you very much for sharing that. Another quick question now. Have you ever peer reviewed a manuscript? So this is just a standard yes or no question. And again, this is going to help our speakers tailor their presentations to you and to your experience. We really appreciate your quick responses coming in. Thank you very much. Just a moment, I'm going to share those. Okay, I'm going to share that now. Very interesting 50-50 split. So that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Okay, so our presenters will have more questions for you later on, so do answer those polls when they pop up on your screen. If you have any issues, if you can't access the poll from your device, just drop us a message in the questions box. Let us know your answer that way. Let us know your questions, your thoughts and your feedback. So thank you for your engagement, and we know that you're very excited to learn from our speakers, so I'm going to hand over to the experts. And over to you, Michael.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm in Oxford in the UK today. And speaking first, I have the privilege of being able to give a little explanation really about what peer review is and why it's important. Those polls were really useful, so I'm assuming anything from a basic level of knowledge, with about many of you being early career researchers, but encouragingly about half of you have already had some opportunity to do peer review, so that's really good to see. So I hope you'll get something from it, whatever stage you're in. We're going to be focusing, just for clarity, on journal peer review rather than, let's say, book review or grant applications. But for those of you who are early career researchers or have that less experience of peer review, I hope what you'll find today is, I mean, you're going to be the peer reviewers of the future. So I hope today what you'll find is something to whet your appetite to help shape the development of peer review Just level setting to start with, what is peer review? Essentially, it's the formal evaluation of one person's work by an independent person or persons qualified to make that evaluation. So the key things here are that it's a formal, organized process. It's an evaluation or an assessment. It's independent, so that we don't have things like bias and conflict of interest. It's human-led. It involves people. We're going to be talking a lot more about AI and machine learning and so on later on. And it's by somebody who's qualified. And of course, this webinar comes in Peer Review Week, the theme of Peer Review Week, which is a global virtual initiative to celebrate and discuss anything at all related to peer review. The theme this year is all about using AI, leveraging AI and technology in peer review. So moving on to think a bit more about peer review, it's faced a lot of criticisms over the years, and I've got some examples here. The first one, the top left, is maybe the classic example from a journal editor talking about peer review being a flawed process at the heart of science and journals. And then there are other headlines. Perhaps you've seen some of these things. Perhaps you're familiar with these critiques and criticisms of peer review, it being a scam, it not working to guarantee academic rigor. And there's this Facebook group, if those of you are on Facebook, there's this Facebook group, Reviewer 2 Must Be Stopped, with which is very popular, particularly among early career researchers. And it speaks really to the concerns that early career researchers in particular have around understanding what peer review is and what is the real value of peer review and how it can be quite a complicated process. Well, let's look at some of these criticisms and think of some of the problems that have really surfaced. And I'm going to focus on just a few, but the first one is about I don't have time to review. Editors that we speak to at Wiley will persistently and consistently say their #1 problem is finding people to review, and that goes on to my next point in a moment. But the reason is because reviewers often, people who, especially the more established you are in your career, will say, I just don't have time to review. Well-established researchers will get maybe 5-10 invitations a week to do peer review, and they just don't have the time to do that. So how can we help researchers find the time to spend that time more productively and more usefully in peer review? Sam's going to be talking more about how we support researchers in doing peer review through technology to help reviewers focus on what humans can bring to the peer review process and to use that time well. Time's a commodity, so if you're going to spend time doing things, you want to use it productively and efficiently. The next criticism is about there not being enough peer reviewers. So the numbers of invitations that editors will send out to peer reviewers to review a manuscript are going up and up every year just to get, let's say, a minimum of 2 peer reviewers, which is a fairly standard norm. How can we resolve that problem? How can we help editors to tap into wider networks of peer reviewers? How can we diversify the pools of experts that reviewers will tend to go to? Editors want to know that they can trust peer reviewers. They want to know that people have the expertise. They want to know that they're people who are real people rather than, let's say, just a machine. So we need to think about how we can support editors increasing that community engagement and avoiding the burnout that reviewers often talk about. And then the third criticism about peer review taking too long. So if you're an author, and many of you will be authors, you'll no doubt have experienced the pain and the tribulation of submitting a manuscript and then it taking forever to get a decision on that. So there are ways in which we can make peer review a much more efficient process. We can do things like transferable peer review, where you submit to one journal, perhaps you get a rejection from that journal, but you can then submit to another journal and your reviews can go with your manuscript to that second journal. That avoids the waste of peer review, so it solves some of the other problems on this slide and reduces ultimately the time to publication. So just thinking about the processes of peer review, technology can be useful to support those. This slide talks about some of the challenges around bias in peer review, and it's a spectrum really. There are different ways of tackling problems of bias, and Elizabeth will be talking later about some of the ethical challenges around peer review, particularly when it comes to technology. But thinking, if you go from left to right here, you've got essentially more anonymity over to the left and then more transparency to the right. And there are different ways in which journals have tried to address the problems of bringing bias into peer review. We want to know that we can trust the published research. We want to know that it's gone through a very fair and rigorous and trustworthy process. And so journals are adapting policies and adapting processes and workflows to try and ensure that. What do researchers themselves think? We do surveys. Most publishers will do regular surveys of researchers, people who submit work to them and people who do reviews for their journals. And this is a survey that we conducted in 2024. And it compares, actually, you can see in the histogram here, you've got a couple of data points, and in those cases the earlier data point is from a study of peer reviewers that we did back in 2015, and the things that I've highlighted here I think are really interesting, speaking to what what researchers find is the value in peer review, because peer review is not just about an editor asking you to do a peer review and you're submitting it and that's the end of the story. So the two things that I've highlighted here that we see an increase in over that 10-year time period are seeing it as a sense of obligation as a member of the research community. So the sense of altruism, I guess, there, but also responsibility, duty. This is what you owe the community, but also building relationships with journals. And that's incredibly valuable to you, particularly if you're an early career researcher, being able to build those relationships with journals. The study that we did back in 2015, we published it with the title Rewarding Reviewers, Sense or Sensibility, and the rewarding aspect of peer review I think is really telling, because peer review is rewarding for you as researchers in the sense that it gives you some credit in your community and with journals, but also we want to think about how we can make it a rewarding activity for you as well, rather than it being a chore, a burden. This is one quote that I love from the editor of a journal that we published. We asked editors to talk about how peer review can be beneficial. What benefit does it bring you? And what benefit does it bring your community? And I love this quote saying, peer review at its best expresses the generosity that the intellectual community shares with one another. Speaking yes to the duty and the responsibility that we see researchers appreciating, but also this is how research communities develop. This is how the scientific, the scholarly research develops and progresses. This is all part of that same mechanism. So what we're going to look at with my next two colleagues, Sam and Elizabeth, is thinking about shaping the future of peer review. At Wiley, AI is really at the heart of everything that we're doing now, and it's AI being the thing that drives the pace of innovation in scholarly publishing. So in the middle there, we're talking there about the human creativity, which is the peer review that we cannot replace with AI. So what we're going to be thinking about is how can AI, how can technology supplement and support the human creativity, which is really at the core of peer review as it progresses. So with that, excuse me, just one more thing before I hand over to Sam. Resources to support you, particularly if you're an early career researcher, but wherever you are, we have a free module, the Wiley Researcher Academy. You're very welcome. You're encouraged to sign up for that. And it just explains all you need to know to become an effective peer reviewer. It's a very thorough course, so give yourself some time, but I think you'll find it really rewarding and helpful if you want some understanding of the peer review process. So I'm going to pause there and hand over to my good colleague, Sam.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, I'm Sam. So I'm a senior product manager here at Wiley. I used to work at other journals like eLife and BMJ, but I've also done a lot of work with cross-publishing initiatives like STM, where I sit on some of the identity working groups. So I come at this from a very product operations perspective. What does that mean? My role at Wiley here is really building and working with a team of product managers and integrity specialists and developers. to work on software solutions that support peer review and research integrity at Wiley. So for the last 4 years, I've really worked on the development of these submission, screening, and peer review platforms. Next slide, please, Michael. So what I really want to share with you today are some reflections on the tools we build and how they're shaping the ways that we assess scholarly content. So how they support you as researchers, us as publishers, and what role these tools play in developing the peer review process. So just as Michael mentioned, what you'll see throughout this thread is that that human element, that critical thinking piece, is at the core of all of this peer review activity. It's really essential to what we're doing here. But we also need to be able to recognize the need for the right tools to be available to us. So as many of you probably know, submission and peer review platforms have been a really key part of publishing infrastructure for a long time. I started in this industry about 13 years ago. Those same tools I used then, people still use now everywhere. And I suspect some of you have had some interaction with these. So many of you will have submitted reviews before, for instance. Many of you will have submitted articles before. And particularly for publishers, we often find ourselves in this position where we're also technologists and we're developing software that us and you guys can work with. And we can see how this innovation goes hand in hand with scholarly communication trends. So when we talk about software and innovation in publishing from a product perspective, it's really important to address that challenge of scale in the bottom corner. We know that research output is increasing. We also know that with new technology, there are ways for us to mitigate that increase. But we also know that with this comes real challenges that can undermine research integrity, for instance, and Elizabeth will talk to some of that later. I find this area really fascinating. The idea of being able to view a network at scale really helps you recognize trends. And thirdly, with that researcher as the customer approach, we need to make things accessible for you. We need to make it easy for you to manage your workload, also need to manage global reach and impact and empower you to have the access to these things. Next slide, please. So really quick glance. This slide is outdated, but I think you can see the way the trend is going. We see an almost exponential growth in scholarly output. That's 4.2 million articles that are published, and that's the ones that are published. These aren't the ones that are submitted. We see far more submissions here. So there's clearly a huge challenge in how we scale peer review whilst also retaining quality and coverage, and also using technology to help us with that in different ways. Next slide, please. So many of you are going to be familiar with submission and peer review platforms. This is something that almost every large scale or small scale journal uses to help manage these things. Every publisher has been using these tools for years. These really are essential platforms in our current models. And we can quickly look a bit closer at what submission and peer review platforms do. So in case you haven't been on these tools before, these are online systems used by journals to manage the process of submission and review and decisions. So really, this is the interface that authors will use to upload manuscripts, but it's also the interface used by editors to look at the manuscripts. And it's also the place where people can review these, like Michael was talking about earlier. So crucially, researchers exist in these spaces in a whole variety of different roles, and you can dip in and you can dip out, ideally in seamless, smart, nice ways. Next slide, please. But we can also gain benefits from these platforms, especially as publishers. We can look at ways to automate this workflow and to make sure this is efficient and operational, and that you guys get decisions quickly and that you can interact and make decisions quickly. Again, referring back to a lot of the problems we see in the peer review space, we don't really want these tools to be things that impede your ability. We want to help you do these things effectively. So we think a lot about workflow automation, using reviewer matching tools, leveraging AI to support reviewer suggestion, and also just practically around having dashboards so you can handle these things and you can see what you need to do and actively step in and assess. And I think this line of thought should persist through the whole platform, and it should also extend to the submission space and the post-peer review space too. Next slide, please, Michael. So in those submission and peer review platforms, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of innovation. These platforms can help us provide security. They can help us provide integrity in our research and publishing processes. They help us manage wide varieties of peer review models, but we can also look at a top-down level to have effective ways to detect plagiarism and image manipulation or statistical errors. And we can use this knowledge, and you can use this knowledge to feed back on how to improve the quality of your review, in turn the quality of the paper, But crucially, these things help us understand and prevent us from undermining the quality of our published research, and in turn safeguarding that wider research ecosystem. We can also innovate around global access and outreach. Diversity of reviewers, equity of early career researchers is really a challenge we try to address. We want everyone to be able to access these things and do these things equally. And then finally, it's also worth pointing out that submission and peer review platforms are just a small part of this bigger ecosystem. There's lots and lots of external outreach and lots of external initiatives that people use to really share metadata and track research and look at the impact of research. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. Next slide, please, Michael. So just really quickly, is just to provide a scene for anyone that hasn't been familiar with these processes before. These are the practical functions that editors and peer reviewers do when they're in the platform. So when editors receive a manuscript, they make an initial assessment. Is the paper relevant for the journal? Does it fit the scope of the journal? Is it something they would usually publish? But also they want to take a look to see who might be relevant to actually work on the paper and handle it. Often they'll go on a database search. If you've registered in any of these systems before, you will be familiar with signing up and getting invitations and requests to review. But they can also look externally, so they can use databases such as ORCID, Google Scholar, Web of Science, to see if there are researchers that are relevant in the field and try and pull them in to work with them. They look at suitability, expertise, conflict of interests, and they really look from a network analysis perspective to see if people really might fit with the review. This is one of those areas of opportunity with technology, is that we can do this at far greater scale and with far broader user sets. So if you're an author that's ever submitted a paper, it's really likely that you've been surfaced in one of these databases, and that's a great indicator of your engagement in the peer review process. And hopefully after this, it means you get invitations sent to you, and you can dip in and you can handle those papers and you can review them. And not only do you review the papers, but you can see upcoming work in your fields and look at them and see what's there. So really from a product perspective, this is a huge network analysis. We can really try and solve this problem with some of the tools that we have available. Next slide, please, Michael. Just to shift gears really quickly, I think there's value in talking about some of those external innovations in scholarly communications, this ecosystem. ORCID is a really good example. If you're not familiar with ORCID, go get an ORCID. It's really helpful in terms of building trust around your researcher profile. There's a great space there for you to be able to see a collection of your works, and more importantly, it means you can start generating feedback loops. I love feedback loops. Feedback loops are great. It means if you do work for us that's great, or you write good papers, or you handle good reviews, we know about that and we can tell more people about it. It means that you get these constant, trustworthy research practices that enable us to know that you guys are really good at what you do, but also allow us to vouch for you and improve your reputation and your standing. Next slide, please. I spoke a lot at the start about tools to protect integrity. At Wiley, we've adopted an approach of really pushing hard to move our integrity process from being reactive to proactive, so pushing a lot of our checks earlier in the process. But by exposing and surfacing these signals, we not only catch and push pause on papers that might be research integrity risks or potential paper mills, but it also means we can help take weight off downstream peer review workloads. So you see content that we know is trustworthy and we know is safe. Next slide really quickly. Thanks. So we can't really talk about innovation without talking about AI. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. I was at a conference last week and every single presentation was about it. So I'm talking about it as well. I'm sorry, I'm reinforcing this. Especially when thinking about LLMs as potential in the peer review, there are lots of things we should consider. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide and flag up a poll. I think we just want to ask you all in the audience how you feel about using these tools.
Thanks, Sam. We'll just leave that up for a few more seconds to get some more responses. Thanks everyone for your prompt engagement. Over half of you have voted, and it's exciting looking at the results. We have a real mixed bag here, so yeah, I'm excited to share that very soon. Just get a few more of you voting there. And the answers are ranging from very concerned to very positive. Okay, we'll wrap that up now, and I'm going to share those results so that you can all see what a mixed bag we have.
That is a mixed bag. That is a really mixed bag. I kind of assumed it would be a mixed bag. My opinion on this changes, I think, every single day. So what you asked me today may not be what I answer tomorrow.
Definitely. Okay, closing that down.
That's very much what I expected, and I think that aligns with a lot of what we've spoken about with other groups on this. So AI tools are going to reshape research workflows. They're going to boost efficiency in things like data analysis and dissemination. They will absolutely redefine the meaning and the behaviors and the boundaries that we have to straddle when we're looking at peer review. And I think you guys can already see from platforms and startups that these tools have really wide-ranging potential to disrupt and revitalize and kind of help us explore some of the ways in which we generate and we collaborate and we distribute research. So AI leads us into this space where the outputs of research begin to change. It means we can start to envisage research as a bit more of a living, iterative, collaborative project even. But it also means we can start looking at research as this evolving narrative that moves beyond isolated manuscripts. Researchers can constantly revisit and refine their findings. We can do this a lot quicker. We can tighten those feedback loops that we were talking about earlier. And I think the key here is that publishers and publishing are going to have to adapt and are adapting to support more dynamic models of continuous research publication. But realistically, we need to do this with that middle piece. We need it with that critical thinking at its heart. So if we go on to the next slide. Oh, something's disappeared, but it's okay. Let's go on to the next one if it's moving. I think there was a surprise animation in there that I didn't see animate. So Wiley surveyed almost 5,000 researchers, and we were trying to take a look and understand how researchers are feeling about AI and where they see practical application from it. And as you can see in this diagram, there's definitely a huge interest in looking at how this might be used to identify relevant reviewers, to increase productivity, to increase speed of peer review. But we still see that automated feedback to assure clarity and assistance. Like we think about these tools a lot, but we still see this as a very human focused piece of work. And just on the next slide as well, you can see a little bit more depth in terms of the interest of these use cases. So we see that 60% of people here have an interest in personally using these tools to help increase the speed of peer review. And as you know, like only 53% there still say that AI outperforms humans. So I think there's a balance here. And the overwhelming theme that we see is that these users consider publisher guidance and policies to be really important in terms of how we implement this use of AI. We need to think about how we approach this. You need to think about how we approach this in joined up ways. I think we need to look at considering disclosure, so appropriate disclosure of use. Researchers need to be prepared to be transparent about usage of tools, but simultaneously publishers and industry bodies need to think about how we can do this collaboratively, how we can make frameworks and systems and platforms that give you the right guidelines to ensure that we're all on the same page. And these things need to be actionable and need to be introduced in ways that add value to that process. I think one of the really exciting areas here is how we can leverage AI to tell stories. It's really good at unpicking narratives behind papers and unpicking narratives behind the peer review process. But to allow you guys to do that, we as publishers also need to be able to provide tools and integrations that support you doing that. We need to support that parallel research generation. And I think there's a balance to be struck between AI and personal expertise. We want to enhance productivity, but we want to preserve the critical insight that comes from you guys as experts. So I think this is all about leveraging things collaboratively as partners and being really clear as we go forward. I think all parties here have a really joint responsibility to be actively engaged. I think the last few years have shown the huge speed at which the community can adapt and adopt some of these, but we want to be approaching this with integrity and transparency and equity in mind. I think that was the last slide. I might be surprised and we might find another one. Okay. So this is just another deep dive on some of those things we found. So 61% of people here are interested in personally using AI, and that bottom right-hand corner falls back on what I was just saying. I think there's a joint responsibility here for publishers to provide guidance to help people use these things and to help us navigate what things will look like. I think particularly as early career researchers, some of you guys are going to be using this from day one, and I think you will really understand the benefits of using these tools. With that, I would like to hand over to Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Michael. Really interesting perspectives on peer review. I'm Elizabeth Moylan. I'm Senior Manager for Research Integrity, Strategy and Policy, and I'll give you my perspective on some of these issues. Next slide, please, Michael. So just to orientate you from where I'm coming within Wiley, I'm part of the research integrity team, and our role is to really ensure that research integrity is supported and strengthened through all our processes. So we drive policy and best practice, and that goes from submission right through to publication of a paper. We work with researchers in their various roles as editors, peer reviewers and authors, and we have a dedicated team that will support those colleagues if issues arise either during peer review or following publication of a paper. They may be individual cases or large-scale investigations. And of course, we collaborate within Wiley, and we collaborate across the industry, you know, to really learn from where we're at. That's really important with the current, you know, implosion of AI, and develop best policy and guidance. Next slide, please, Michael. And so one of those ways of collaborating is with COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. Many of you may be familiar with COPE, and we collaborated with them on some ethical guidelines for peer reviewers. So if you're thinking, oh, I want to start a peer review, what do I do? What should I think about? These guidelines would be a great resource to go to. And I'll go over some of those in the next slide, please, Michael. Yeah, some of these ethical responsibilities that are highlighted in the COPE guidelines are really, when you're approached to review a manuscript, you really want to treat it as confidential. We absolutely encourage, you know, postdocs, early career researchers to do peer review. So if your PI got an invitation to do a peer review and they wanted to pass it to you to do, that's absolutely fine, but just let the journal know that that's what you're doing. And also it's important that you get credit for that peer review as well, or even a joint peer review if you want to begin and cutting your teeth on the peer review process. Always important to evaluate the manuscript objectively for the research presented and in a timely fashion, and to decline to review if you really feel you've got a conflict of interest and you don't think you should review the manuscript. It's really important to justify your opinions on review, not just say why something's good or why something's bad, but to explain and support your evaluation, and to alert the editor to any potential ethical issues. And it's really important to give feedback in a professional and kindly manner. That's what will land well with a researcher receiving that peer review, and that's probably how you'd like to receive a peer review as well. Next slide, please, Michael. So on that note of being supportive with peer review, I just wanted to call out a tweet that went viral a couple of years ago from Lee McLean, who is an associate research professor at the University of Delaware. And she said, "My peer reviews got a lot better when I shifted my mindset from my job is to find everything wrong with this paper to my job is to help these authors get this paper published, be it at this journal or the next." And I think that's a really lovely quote. And Jackie Jones at Wiley, our Associate Director for the Editor Engagement Group, went on to have a conversation with Lee and explore this in a little more depth. So I've put a link on the slides to the blog interview she did, and I'm sure you'll be receiving the slides after the presentation. And Lee goes on to say it's really peer review is what really makes research move forward. Doing peer review can make you a better researcher because you're exposed to the cutting edge in your field of what's going on, what's happening right now. And if you can frame peer review in a supportive manner, that really lands well with the author, the researcher, to improve their work. either for this project or years down the line. And sometimes we've seen great, collaborations come to fruition when a peer reviewer really engages with a researcher, and they may go on to even work together later down the line as well. Peer review is also a learning opportunity for the reviewer as well. I think you learn something through the act of doing, but yeah, empathy and framing the feedback constructively is a really key message I'd like to emphasize. Next slide, please, Michael. So in terms of research integrity and peer review, where is the intersection? Well, peer review is really, as Michael explained, the sort of central formal evaluation of originality and quality. We really want to make sure it's conducted ethically and in line with journal policies, but it can also act as a point of escalation during the process if research integrity concerns are spotted. Next slide, please, Michael. And just to kind of give you a sort of visual of what we see as a publisher, these are the kind of issues that may come to light during peer review or after publication. They might not all turn into issues themselves, but there's things that we would want to investigate or look at. And so it just gives you a view there on the sort of peer review issues that come up in the round of issues that we may see. And I'm a real believer in sharing data, like Sam said, sharing our information, because some of the things we see don't necessarily need to have come up during peer review if they'd have been recognised earlier in the process. So, authorship disputes or things like that. It's very hard for a publisher to help at that point, but earlier on in the process with those conversations at the institution, they can really be tackled there. But if we take a deep dive now into what we see into peer review, Michael, with the next slide, we can break those issues down a little bit more. So, as Michael mentioned, bias can be an issue in peer review, and the different models of peer review can tackle that. Sometimes we see breaches in confidentiality of the process or undeclared conflicts of interest that can skew the process, or even more large-scale manipulations, compromised peer review, and citation manipulation. We're currently working on some guidance because we don't want a situation where a researcher's being asked to add 10 citations to a paper by a reviewer that is inappropriate. So we're looking for this and picking these things up. And sometimes we see issues related to the models of peer review or to editorial policy or process. And we're always trying to, develop best practice and policy in terms of what we learn from these cases. And I've cheekily put AI and peer review there because, as my colleagues have said, this is really coming down the tracks now. We may be seeing cases related to AI and peer review as well. So next slide, please, Michael. So yeah, how can we rethink peer review in the AI era? It's peer review week, and this is the topic of the conversation that's going on during this week. And I was quite staggered to see this article, Viewpoint, published in Nature, alluding to those large language models and how they're transforming peer review. And this gentleman, James Zhu, is saying that 17% of the peer reviews in his field are now written by artificial intelligence. And that's just incredible. And so I think the community is looking for guidance on this and how to proceed. And so I've put on the screen here some guidance coming out of Europe and coming out of STM on how to approach generative AI in scholarly communications and in peer review. And really, I think the essence here is recognizing, just as you would with a piece of research, if you're doing the research, you are the author. If you're reviewing the research, you are the peer reviewer, and we want that, critical thinking from you. If you put a peer review, if you put a manuscript into an AI tool and use that to do peer review, it's just like as you would be sharing that manuscript with a colleague, if you don't tell the journal about it, you're breaking the confidentiality of the peer review process. And in actual fact, because researchers, when they submit their manuscripts have not signed up to that, you're breaking copyright and all sorts of agreements. So our guidance at the moment at Wiley is in line with these guidance, generic guidelines that are coming out to help the community, that we don't want people to do that. We don't want people putting manuscripts into these tools to generate peer reviews. And that's because these tools are just not, you know, capable of giving that individual critical thinking and nuance that a human is. Now, having said that, if you've written your peer review report and you've evaluated a manuscript and you want to use an AI tool to improve it because you think, oh, I haven't got time to really, you know, make this land in a nice way for a researcher to read, you can use those tools to improve the quality of your report, but that's just your report alone, and we would want you to declare that, just as we would want you to declare if you used AI to help you write your manuscript. Next slide, please, Michael. So I think that's where we are right now, and this is definitely reflected in Wiley's best practice guidelines. And I just wanted to take some screenshots, you know, to shine a spotlight on peer review and to shine a spotlight on artificial intelligence. And we've got some more guidance coming soon, next month. So watch out for that to help and support the research community. Next slide, please, Michael. So that's where we are now, and it's going to be interesting, as Sam says, you know, in the future to see how we, you know, how AI can evolve and whether we might have a world where we are actually having AI reviews alongside human reviews. I think that's, you know, people are doing experimentation right now. But just to close out reflections on what we've all said so far, in thinking about how peer review makes you a better researcher, we wanted to do a little AI test ourselves. So we asked Copilot that question just to sort of see what it would come up with. And really, it's quite interesting to see, you know, it does echo, the findings here do echo what Michael and Sam were also reflecting on, in how, you know, it really improves the quality of your own work if you do peer review. It really enhances your critical thinking and broadens your knowledge. And it builds those networks with the community, with the journals, and improves communication. And hopefully really makes you think about those ethical standards that we've touched on, and how best to sort of foster collaboration. So I'll leave it there. I think we're going to move to another poll, Zoe, and then we can take questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Elizabeth. So now we're asking, how helpful has peer review been for you as a researcher? So if you could select one of those options, ranging from not helpful at all to very helpful, and submit the poll, and we'll shortly share those responses. And thank you everyone for the great questions that you've been sending in. As Elizabeth said, we'll shortly begin the Q&A section and answer your questions, and so do continue to send those in. Okay, we've got about half of you voting, just like a few more responses. Yeah, that's great. Okay, and I'm going to share that now. Mostly positive, as you can see, so that's great, really good to hear. And okay, now I think we can get started with some questions. Is that right, Michael, for the next slide? Yeah, okay, great. Now we just see you all. Okay, so thank you again for the great presentations, Sam, Michael and Elizabeth. Really great knowledge there, and I really hope our audience are benefiting from your presentations. So I'll kick us off with some of the questions that we've received. And you may have already covered this in the presentations, but it would be helpful to reiterate and provide some key takeaways for our audience. So question one, could you explain how AI can help accelerate the review process? Who would like to take that?
I'm happy to kick that one off. Great question. Thank you very much. I might tie it in with another one that's about reviewers being assigned to research papers that seem outside their area of expertise. So I'm sure Sam and Elizabeth have thoughts on this. I did a study probably about 10 years ago, actually, looking at reviewers' reasons for declining to review. Accelerating the review process is really about finding enough reviewers to tackle or to provide feedback on papers at scale. That's the heart of the issue, really, and Sam talked about doing this at scale. And if we can match papers much more efficiently to reviewers up front, that's the easiest way, I think, to help editors accelerate what they can do to the review process. So the first thing I would say is about matching reviewers appropriately, and AI can be used to do smarter things around that. Sam, I'll refer to you in a moment to talk about what we've been doing in Research Exchange around that, but also not just about is this person do they have the expertise in that area, is that current? We're moving away from static databases where maybe we've got out-of-date data on what reviewers have been working on in the past. We need to know what they're doing at the moment. And we also need to know that they're available to do the review. So it's not enough just to know that Elizabeth is an expert on publication ethics. We need to know that she's actually got time to do that at the moment. She's not being spending her time doing other really worthwhile things as well. So I think there are a couple of things off the top of my head, and using the data really that we can tap into to solve some of these problems at scale is where I would start. But Sam, I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts on this.
I totally agree with that. I covered some of these in the talk, but I think there are areas that really interest me to explore. I think I like the idea of collaborative review. I like the idea of using tools like this to enable people to work together on reviewing a manuscript. I think it's especially nice if you've got early career researchers and kind of mentors who help each other, and they're working on the same manuscript in the same way that you would collaboratively work on a Google Doc, things like that. There are ways for tools now to amplify certain parts of the manuscript and bring them out and let people work on them together. And I think the idea of using AI to do really kind of out of the box co-creation of review pieces is really interesting. I think that also helps when you think about things like targeted review. So some people are really good at stats. We have people that are dedicated stats reviewers. Having tools like this that say, hey, look, this is a part of a manuscript you'd be interested in. Do you want to weigh in and kind of collectively help out another team with those reviews? I think there's lots of levels where people can work together. I think it's also worth pointing out and being honest about it. There are tedious parts to peer review too. So if you're an editor, maybe you've got 100 references on a paper. It takes time to look at those things. It takes a lot of time, especially if you're handling multiple papers a day. Being able to do this kind of robustness assessment and give top-down views on things that might be issues and draw them to the surface really helps speed up time in peer review and lets people focus on stuff they're really interested in, like the actual quality and the novelty of the research, as opposed to the pieces that feel a bit more like an exercise. So I think there are things there that we can use to improve all of these things.
Thank you both so much for those answers. Let's move on to this. This one's interesting. How can reviewers distinguish between AI-assisted writing and the researcher's original contribution?
Can I grab this one?
Please.
It's really hard. It's really hard. I mean, I'm going to pitch this from two perspectives. One is that if you work with AI tools, you become familiar with them and you can begin to see commonalities in those responses. I work with AI tools every day and I can see things in those outputs of tools that you can really latch onto, and you can say, I'm pretty sure this is written by certain things. But I think that kind of defeats the point. I think the area that interests me is that as tools like these become better, it's going to be harder and harder to detect these outputs. And I think what that pushes us towards is a space where we look for total assessment of quality. I think provenance is interesting. I think where the manuscript comes from is interesting, but I think the focus on, is the science sound? Is the design quality good? Are the stats reliable and robust? Like, does the the pitch within this paper, does it match the data provided? Does it all stack up? I think these are questions we ask anyway in peer review, but I think we need to be veering more towards that perspective of, does work meaningfully advance knowledge? Does it hold up to scrutiny? I think this is going to become more crucial than ever. And I think this is why having spaces for collaborative review as opposed to small boxed in reviews means that people can unpick these things together and recognize trends themselves. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be focusing on provenance. I think understanding where the article comes from is really valuable. It means that if you do think an article or a review has been written by a tool, you can spend more time scrutinizing it. But I still think we need to be focusing and having a laser pinpointed focus on the quality of a paper, the style of a paper, and the substance of a paper. Can people communicate the message they're trying to tell us in the paper? And if so, is that message accurate and valid? I don't know what you guys think. My perspective on this changes every day, by the way, so please don't hold me to these words.
Yeah, I've got very little to add on that. I think generally when the genie is out of the bottle, right, on AI, it's being used extensively. And the question is, how do we put the right guardrails in place to make sure that the quality and the integrity of what does make it into the literature is robust? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sticking to the topic of AI, will there be any training available on how to conduct peer reviews using AI?
I can have a stab at that one. I think really at the moment, we're saying not use AI in the peer review process yourselves. So for researchers who we invite to peer review, we want your critical thinking, we want your individual critique on that manuscript. So do it as you would, you know, yourselves. If you wanted to improve the text of that report, then that's okay to use a tool, or you know, you just wanted to improve the English or the language or something like that, that's fine, but declare it. And I think what's going to be interesting, you know, in years to come is if we look back on this conversation now and think, oh my goodness, you know, we were just so conservative, and little did we know that, you know, there would be hopefully futuristic ways, as Sam was hinting at, that you could be writing a review in real time with an AI assistant prompting you that you've just said something critical and you haven't backed it up, you know, so you think, okay, I will say that you should have used this statistical technique, not this one, or you've done a review but you haven't mentioned the figures at all, or something like that, you know, in a supportive framework. So that would be interesting to see, and whether we will go to a future state where it will become routine to have an AI review alongside a human review. You know, this is we can only imagine what's sort of possible right now. I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so picking through the questions. Here's one. Should we consider ways to compensate or incentivize peer reviewers for their valuable contributions?
I can start on this one. Something we've looked at extensively at Wiley. Consistently, surveys of researchers show that they're not doing peer review for payment, or they don't want necessarily to be compensated for time by way of payment or something in kind. What they want is to be recognized. Now, maybe the needle is changing on this. Maybe if we did another survey in 5 years' time, we'd find something different. But these findings have been consistent over the last 10 years. Over the findings from our study that we did in 2015, over the findings that we and other publishers have done more recently. So I think what we're finding is that researchers want recognition above financial compensation. We haven't seen strong evidence that offering incentives, financial incentives to peer reviews actually makes the quality or the speed of peer review any better, unless in some cases you're paying for a fast track peer review process or something. But that's a different sort of dynamic. I think there are inherent problems with journal peer review being compensated around things like the quality, the motivations for doing peer review, what is an equitable way of compensating everybody regardless of where they are in the world or what career stage they're in, those sorts of questions. So I think it's complex. I know in book peer review it's quite different, and traditionally peer reviewers of books do get paid. I think that's a different model, and I think there are different dynamics going on there. So we at Wiley have been focusing very much on recognition, and I don't see this as well. Okay, we're all publishers here, but I don't see this as just a publisher problem or a publisher issue to solve. I think the whole question of recognizing peer review as a scholarly academic endeavor is the real nub of the issue here. At the moment, peer reviewers tend not to get any recognition by their institution, by their employer. It's not recognized as a learning activity that actually promotes and develops them as researchers. And I think that's a massive problem and a massive undervaluing of what peer review is. So I would start there, actually. I don't know if Sam or Elizabeth's got other things to say.
Nothing more on that. I think you smashed the answer for that one.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and we're getting some comments in agreeing with your thoughts there as well. So thank you to our audience for agreeing with Michael there, and for the great questions to prompt that discussion. Now we are getting to the end of time. I'm going to ask a question that is actually quite nuanced and involving, and there might be a lot to unpack here. So this is a real challenge for you guys to answer this as best you can with the limited time we have. But I want to ask, so authors are often encouraged by publishers to use professional editing services to improve the language quality of their manuscripts. In that context, why is it considered unethical to use AI tools to enhance writing, especially when the research itself is original?
Thank you, Zoe. That's a good question. I think we can clarify that. So it's the act of putting somebody's confidential manuscript into a tool which we're not sanctioning at the moment, because that's confidential and we want people's opinions, not the AI's opinions. However, if you're to use an AI tool to improve the writing of your manuscript, you're struggling to say, oh, I can't write this figure caption in a very nice way, I need AI to do it for me, or I've done my review but it's a bit rough, I want it to be, the grammar to be improved, that's absolutely fine. So just want to clarify that if that came across wrongly, that it's fine to help in that way, and declare that that's what you've done.
And just on this side, I think there's crossover in those tools, but I think it goes back to that stance of looking at the quality of a paper and the style and the integrity. And the style, it really for me is it communicated clearly and concisely? Like, is it clear that the authors of the paper understand what they're writing about, or have communicated it in a way that other people can understand what they're writing about? I think as peer reviewers and as editors, we need to be looking at both the soundness of the science and the way it's being communicated to people, and tools like that generally help. Like they genuinely help. So I do think I think over time better means for disclosure. Like as publishers, we need to be able to have spaces where people can say, hey, I've used these tools, this is where I've used them. We need to be clear in the same for peer reviewers and editors, saying if they use those tools, hey, when I was looking at your paper, I used this to help me come to a decision, and we have a dialogue and a discourse there. I think disclosure over time is one of the key things here. We're going to have to understand how to be honest and open about what we're using and not penalize people for using really valuable tools. But at the same time, being aware that even tools like that sometimes produce hallucinations, and that we should be careful and should be robust when we're looking at the content of a paper. I think it's all down to the content. I think it's down to the quality of the content, and that's what really matters.
Wow, what a fantastic note to end on. I think that's a fantastic way for you both to answer that question. Thank you, all three of you, for your fantastic presentations and this great discussion that we've had with the questions that have come in from our audience. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. As a reminder, an email with a link to the recording and your certificate of attendance will be sent tomorrow. You'll receive that in about 24 hours from now. You will also see a survey in that email, so do fill that out. We're always looking to improve our sessions. We really do use your feedback. And so thank you again for our speakers' expertise and time today, and we look forward to seeing everybody at a future event. So goodbye for now.
Thank you, everyone.